Good morning and welcome all, whether you're joining us via Parliament channel, ParlView on YouTube, or tuned into the Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, we thank you. I am Kemuel A, Pascall, your host and moderator for this morning's panel discussion, which forms part of the Parliament channel's week-long celebration and observance of Commonwealth Day 2023, which was celebrated on Monday, 13th of March, 2023. As it's customary on the second Monday in each year in March. I should also let you know that this year marks the 10th anniversary of the signing of the Commonwealth Charter, which outlines what the nation, the 56 nations rather, are aligned to and promote in the areas of peace, justice, inclusion, and the recognition. This morning's discussion is themed Youth, Innovation and Sustainability, Challenging Opportunities in the National Sphere. And this came out of the fact that leaders would have declared 2023 to be the year of the youth, the 2022 Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. So let's get right down into discussions. But before I do that, allow me to introduce my fellow panelists. So this morning to my left, we have Ms. Samantha Rampersad. She's the second Vice President of the Trinidad Youth Council. To her left, we have Ms. Terriann Baker, Vice President of the Trinidad Youth Council. And then we have Mr. Colin Providence of the National Entrepreneurship Development Company. And then to my right, I'm joined by Dr. Marlene Attzs. She's a lecturer and economist at the University of the West Indies. And then to her right, we have Mr. Lawrence Arjoon, CEO of the Heroes Foundation. Good morning, all.
Good morning. Good morning.
When you think about being a youth, what do you think about, let's start with you, Ms. Rampersad. What do you think about when you hear the term youth as a youth? What do you feel?
What do I feel about being a youth? The vibrance of young life, having our whole lives ahead of us to just plan and execute the way that we expect our future to be, a life full of possibilities. Yes, the rainbows, the unicorns, everything in it as well. That's what I feel about being a youth, especially in Trinidad. You know, our culture is so rich and diverse as well.
Ms. Baker?
Well, I mean, just to add to what Samantha had said, as a young person, I feel as though we form the backbone of society, you know, a large part of the workforce. And so as a young person, I see myself not just as a productive, contributing member of society, but one that can bring innovation in the now. You know, this generation of young people, especially now, are really concerned with introducing new methods, you know, reevaluating traditional ways of doing things. So that's how I feel when I think about youth.
Mr. Arjoon, I mean, you probably passed you by now, but this is not to be offensive, but what when you hear the term, what do you think about?
I'm still in that youth category. Yeah, but no, for me, there's hope. It is hope. It is, and it encapsulates everything that these two ladies just said. It is hope in building a future that we can look forward to.
Dr. Attzs?
Oh, as a youth? Oh, lovely. I appreciate that. You know, for me, it's not, well, I don't fall into the 15 to 29 category as defined by the Commonwealth.
Well, some say 35.
Okay. But really, for me, you know, youth is really about the future, and which is why I am really very pleased to be here with this conversation today, because we're talking about how do we navigate a future for the generations to come in Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm really very happy to be here.
Mr. Providence.
All right, I think everyone has said it, and who is youth adjacent, you know, I think that youth is really about empowerment. It's about looking forward to what's next, what's to come, and building on where there's opportunity. So I really see youth as that catalyst, that drive to move people forward.
Certainly. Audience and listeners, please pardon me. I forgot that we have someone virtually, and that's Miss Britany Duncan. She's a road tractor, and she is the PR of the Tobago Youth Council, and she's joining us from Plymouth in Tobago. Miss Duncan, when you hear the term youth, what do you think about?
Good morning. When I hear the term youth, I think about newness. I think about a sense of innovation. As young people, we always bring something new to the table. We always have big, bright ideas. So when I hear this youth, I always think Young people are coming with something new, they're coming with something innovative, they're coming creative. That's what I hear when I hear Zoom.
Certainly, and I like the fact that Ms. Duncan and also Ms. Baker would have included those terms of innovation and sustainability, which really and truly ties into our topic here this morning, and all under our theme of youth innovation, sustainability, challenges and opportunities in the national sphere. When we speak about the national sphere, we're speaking about from a Trinidad and Tobago perspective, not that we're excluding stuff on the outside, but we're really and truly delving deeper into what's happening here in Trinidad and Tobago. When you look at some of the challenges, when we look at some of the challenges in the youth space at present, Ms. Baker, I'd like to ask you, what are some of the major challenges that the youth face of today in particular, because you interact with a lot of youth, you sit as the vice president of the Trinidad Youth Council?
Well, I mean, I think a really glaring issue is unemployment. That's evident. That would have come out even before the pandemic, but more so now after the pandemic. And of course, there's a certain level of, or there's a lack of motivation actually, in terms of how young people want to approach life and how they want to make themselves involved in advocacy specifically. And that lack of motivation kind of stems into almost other areas of their lives. Because if young people are passionate about life and they want to see themselves be a part of the change-making process, if there's no facilitation of that, or if young people are not taken seriously or their voices are not included in discussions such as these, then there is no motivation or no passion to put yourself in a position to make an impact. And then again, another challenge also comes in with education. Now, after the pandemic, some families or some young persons are unable to afford an active education. And then there's also the challenge of feeling as though there's no youth voice in policy drafting and policy advancement. And of course, young people want to feel as though they are part of the discussion, yes, but not after the fact. They want to be a part of the drafting process so that their views are incorporated and that that policy actually reflects the reality of their lives.
Certainly. Mr. Arjoon, you interact with a lot of youth based on the organization that you come from, being the Heroes Foundation. What are your thoughts personally, and also the things that you hear on the ground?
So I'll put that question in the context of what we do at Heroes. So Heroes is a development center that focuses on providing a learning to earning model that children and youth can get into. And for us, that is first step youth development and empowerment. How do we ensure that these young people have the right support to manage their psychosocial development and their psychosocial needs, understand the sustainability, education, equality, environmental sustainability and energy, personal development. But then for us, all of that work will be for nothing if they cannot build sustainable lives and livelihoods, because that's how you build a safe and sustainable future. So the model we've created is youth development and empowerment, going into skills development, so technical skills development for employability, employment connectivity, and livelihood support, and then collaboration for social impact. Now, all of that model came about by really having evidence-based information coming from the children. So we brought together a youth advisory team when we were doing our big reorg and curriculum redevelopment with members from the program and previous members from the program. They supported us in coming up with the model, coming up with the curriculum that met their needs, but also provided opportunities for them. And one point I will add on the employment issue is that the mental health and well-being of children and young people in Trinidad and Tobago is of critical importance if we really want to deal with the problems that people are complaining about in the workplace or in the society. We did an assessment in last year, in March 2020, we did a psychosocial assessment with 200 young people. 95% of them were at risk of emotional behavioral problems, or they have challenges and problems understanding their emotional state, their feelings, being able to respond to change and manage stress in life. And that is a critical part of this puzzle that I think we need to pay more attention to going forward.
Certainly. Dr. Attzs, your thoughts right off the bat, coming off of what Mr. Arjoon would have said. I know he brought a lot of statistics in because he is a person, he's working on the ground, similar to all the other panelists this morning.
It's almost uncanny that there is a common thread in terms of what we're all discussing, because in the presentation that I will do, a very short presentation that I will do in a little while, those are some of the issues I talk about. Sustainable development really requires us formally. Sustainable development is about looking futuristically. how do we ensure that what we do now does not impact on future generations and the ability to earn livelihoods and to be developed and to enjoy the fruits of the national labors. And sustainable development really covers three pillars: the economic, the environmental, and the social. And some of the things that Lawrence was referring to in terms of COVID-19, as the elephant in the room, COVID-19, we really have been looking at a lot of the direct impacts, but not really unearthing some of those indirect. And it's interesting to hear you say that some of the things that are making headlines now that we see happening in our schools, as unfortunate as they are, really could be traced back to some things that we've not really quite grappled with. And I think for our youth to move forward and for our youth to become the leaders that we want them to be in 5 years' time, or even in less time than that, because you are leaders in your own right now, we really have to start to tap into some of those issues to unearth them and to address them frontally.
I do agree with you, and I do like the fact that you would have brought in the sustainable aspect of it, which we are going to touch on later in our discussions. But Mr. Providence, I'd like to bring you in on the discussion now. You are from the National Entrepreneurship Development Company. We know the work of NEDCO, in short, and
Yes.
you could probably tell us what you see from your end.
Right. So from our end, what we see is a lot of youth looking for opportunity. NEDCO, what we've been seeking to provide is additional training, mentorship, and loan access for persons who are looking to get into business, because the notion of doing things the way they were before, where you left school and you got a job, that is sort of going out of the window now. And persons have to look at entrepreneurship as a way forward. But to that end, the system that we have now does not really promote entrepreneurship as a viable means. So what NEDCO is seeking to do is to really reinforce that by the programs that we're offering, and really just trying to open up the national space and debate and conversation around entrepreneurship as a viable means, and especially for the youth. So that's really our thrust. And seeing that we're now under the Ministry of Youth, we even more so kind of getting into that space and trying to understand more. What are the challenges? What are the barriers for young persons in particular who are seeking to sort of empower themselves and get into business?
Sure. Ms. Rampersad, before I bring you in, I want to get Ms. Duncan in to hear her thoughts from Tobago.
Okay, firstly, I want to agree with all of my colleagues with some very good sentiments shared. On my end, the challenges that I would have observed is the quality and the lack of inclusivity of our education system. And some of the disadvantages coming out of that is where we can see the lack of achievement by our young men, the high dropout rate in our high schools and secondary schools, and the lack of inclusivity of our young people with disabilities. I think we often forget them or leave them behind in our education system. I think in order to achieve sustainable development, we have to look at the quality of our education. We have to look at the inclusivity of it and ensuring that no one is left behind, that our young men aren't left behind, that our young people with disabilities aren't left behind, that education is looked at as a holistic view, and we take into consideration the cognitive aspect of education, physical, mental, and everything that coincides to give someone a quality educational arena. I think that it's the core issue of all the things that we face within society, like crime. If we continue to exclude people who don't fit into the normal classroom setting, then they include themselves in crime afterwards because they were left out in that classroom setting. So education is something that we must look at, and providing that inclusivity in our education system.
Certainly. Ms. Rampersad, what are your thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, because I mean, you would have been able to hear from all your fellow panelists.
It's such great contribution. I want to say though that young people are very underappreciated and underutilized. But the reality is that we are our nation's greatest treasure. because we are the leaders of now, as you said, in our own right, but the leaders of the future. And if you're not allowing us a seat at the table, let me stick a pin in there. Young people are now creating their own tables that they want to sit at as well. But if you're not allowing us the room for growth, innovation, to learn how to create sustainability, what are we really doing? Our future not looking so bright if we continue at this speed. Terriann spoke about unemployment, and that is a big issue. You know, it's at 14.9%. And recently, TYC would have had a fair where we had all these employment agencies come out, and the turnout was over 500 people. So the problem isn't that young people don't want to do the work, and it's not that we don't want to be employed. It's just we are so educated. We go to university. Some of us have 2 degrees, a master's, and when you come out, what are we doing with it? There's no jobs available, so where do we turn? And we know how difficult some situations could be. Sometimes it's easier to do the wrong thing than the right thing, but that's not what we want, you know? So we don't really have that much room in terms of employment. And as I was saying that, you know, young people really are underutilized. We feel very underappreciated, except in situations where it turns out to be a convenience for those to allow us to come and sit on a panel discussion because of tokenism. We're here to make them look nice. And that's the reality. I mean, I've started many discussions before where I felt, okay, maybe I'm just a placemaker here. I'm just here to smile and look pretty. But I'm here to do a job. I want young people to have a seat. So we still show up and we try our best, and we hope they call us back next time to be taken seriously. You know?
So do you share similar view, or you have anything different?
Well, I'm slightly off the you know, I mean, what was your terminology in the just off the, you know, the radar in terms of the youth, adjacent to the definition of youth. But I do, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm smiling, and you know, if I have the opportunity just to present the presentation,
sure, that's fine.
The very few slides that I have that I'd like to just put up, so that we can have a chat around it. Everything that I've put on this slide without even consulting, I think it's because I still think of myself as a youth at heart. A lot of it is touched inside of there. The whole question of looking at the state of the economy, because as an economist, that is where I start. That is my starting point. But I think there is an opportunity for our youth to be so much more involved in the youth budgeting process, for example. There actually is an international initiative looking at youth budgeting. How would young people actually frame a budget given what they know of the economy, and what would their focus be, where would their priorities be? So that's one of the issues that I want to talk about. The other thing that our friend from Tobago, Britany, mentioned is the whole question of, if you're not at the table and if you're not given the opportunity to participate formally, you will find informal ways that the country does not like to participate. And then you look at, so one of the slides that I have really looks at the involvement of youth in crime, which I got from the TTPS. You know, I often use these opportunities. Once the Parliament invites me, you know, I call the TTPS and I ask for some data. The extent to which youth are involved in crime. And while, you know, we have, if you take the broad, you know, the hard definition, it's about 160,000 persons who fall within, you know, 15 to 35 in the country. But you will find the crimes in which our youth are either victims or perpetrators. That is worrisome, because again, we want to know what kind of future they're going to have. What is the livelihood? You know, Lawrence spoke about, you know, moving forward, you know, livelihoods. If you're involved in crime at the age of 15, and some of the crimes in which you're involved, including things like murders, armed robberies, then what does the future hold for you? But in order to address that, I do agree totally on occupational hazard. Thanks for the entree, Britany. We have to look at the education system, both formally and informally. So it's not just about, you know, going to primary, secondary, getting a university degree or 2 degrees or 3, as the case might be, but looking at those other persons who may be more tuned to informal education, our mechanics, all of these cars that we have, hybrid, et cetera, who's going to repair those cars? Is it going to be the 60-year-old mechanic that you have in the neighborhood who really does not know the first thing about hybrid? So our systems, all of the systems, including our education system, have to start essentially turning on their heads and making that pivot to take us where we want to be in 5-10 years?
Sure. Dr. Attzs, I do know that you have a presentation, so I think this is a wonderful time for us to bring in the
Sure,
presentation.
just to
And what
put in
we'll do,
some of the, just to
we'll
put
bring
in
it
some of the
in,
data.
you'll comment accordingly, and we'll have your fellow panelists
Sure, of
comment on it.
course.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. So here we are essentially looking at sustainable development. Sustainable development is about being fair to the future, even as we are now looking at it, the role of youth in sustainable development in Trinidad and Tobago, and who are our youth, and looking quickly at sustainable development through that lens. So youth in Trinidad and Tobago, you'll see the red square brackets there. These are data, you know, depending on who you ask, our population is either 1.4, 1.5, 1.3, somewhere around there. So this data, these data suggest that our population is 1.5 in 2022, and the red brackets just kind of captures. So you will see we have about 13% of our population that falls between the ages of 15 to 34 years, which in the international definition, that's who we consider our youth. This is what I want. It's one of our pain points nationally. I'm looking at crime, and as I said, I want to thank the TTPS, their CAPA division, for responding to my request so quickly. Looking at the number of youth persons, 15 to 29 was my initial request, arrested and charged for serious reported crimes from 2018 to 2022. Now I have the disaggregated data, but for the interest of time, I didn't include that on this slide. But you look at the kinds of crimes. So the very long bars, the green bars, possession of firearms and ammunition. So these are persons 15 to 29. Robbery, persons 15 to 29. Breaking offenses, narcotics for trafficking, general larceny. Those are some of the big ticket items. And then you have other crimes at the top of the chart. But they've also been victims of serious crimes as well. And many of our young persons have been victims of robberies, rapes, incest, and other sexual offenses. And as Arjoon made his opening salvo, I went back to 2020, 2021, when we were on lockdowns. And really and truly, one of the things that continues to pain me a little is what has been happening to our youth during those years. And these data suggest you're looking at over 2,500 persons between the ages of 15 to 29 were victims of rapes, incest, and other sexual offenses. To me, that is something that we need to zone in on, because what then happens in terms of the psychological trauma for those persons moving forward? I'm not going to spend too much time, as I said. And the next slide, if Murphy would cooperate, because Murphy always intervenes. Right, here we go. Trinidad and Tobago from a sustainable development lens. Our economy, no news there, no surprises there. Heavily dependent on the energy sector, but the energy sector, we know there has been a lot of volatility because of what has been happening globally, but also what has been happening in terms of Russia and Ukraine. And that is impacting on government's revenue. That is something that our youth need to look at, because we're not, the economy is not as buoyant as it used to be in the past. We do have some buffers in terms of our international reserves. The Heritage and Stabilization Fund, that's something that is meant to provide for the next generation. So that is something that our young people need to know about. And I often find that when you come to talk about the economy, young people are not too keen on that, but you are going to be the leaders of the future. The unemployment rate at 5% in 2022, but we know that youth unemployment tends to be higher, and youth underemployment, what Samantha spoke about in terms of persons having their qualifications, but not able to secure a job. And then, of course, one of the other things that I want us to focus on as we talk about sustainability is government's debt, because the people for whom are going to be responsible for that debt is not me, fortunately. But in 10 years' time, when you become the leaders and the policymakers, issues concerning our environment, the climate change, conversations around climate change and transitioning Trinidad and Tobago from its heavy dependence on non-renewable or oil and gas to renewable energy, the drivers of that process and that transition are, in fact, going to be our youth. The conundrum that faces Trinidad and Tobago as we try to extract revenues from the oil and gas sector to finance our way out of the oil and gas sector. The environment as a resource for economic diversification, the question of tourism, agriculture, etc. The drivers of that, and I know the Ministry of Youth Development has its youth agriculture program, but these are programs that we need to have deeper and wider across the country, also in terms of things like our youth camps and national service. And then, of course, from the social perspective, the third arm of sustainable development, crime and its impact on the economy, especially youth participation in crime and youth unemployment. So we didn't have the conversation before, but you see there is convergence in terms of our thoughts. Our children, the education deficit that could arise because of those years that we lost from COVID. And of course, the inequalities, as Britany mentioned, inequalities that were exacerbated by COVID-19. And my last slide, there is need for us to be conscious and for our youth to own their future. I mentioned, I think, off camera, the whole question of youth budgeting, youth participation and governance. If you, and I like the point that you made, if you're not offered a seat at the table, create your own table. Let's have the conversations we need to have. Youth at risk, we need to have data to inform policy and appropriate interventions. We need to ensure that our education system, both formal and informal, prepare our citizens for the future. So I just want to kind of end there and, just, allow the conversation to flow in terms of the thoughts.
Sure. A lot to unpack today, and I'm sure your fellow panelists will agree, or they would agree rather. In terms of, you touched on youth, you touched on innovation, you touched on sustainability, and how do we create that particular sustainable future that we are looking for? And I think one of the things that I wish to point out to those viewing is that we're not just here to speak about the challenges, but also here to give solutions, because that's essentially what our panel is here to discuss and here to talk about, especially when we look at Trinidad and Tobago. So when we look at innovation from an innovative perspective, how do we create new things? How do we forge sustainable futures, not just for ourselves, but for our children? As Dr. Attzs mentioned, the debt that we're facing now, that's going to need to be repaid in 10 to 15 years. And she wouldn't be the one that needs to repay it. It's going to be our generation. And so how do we move forward? How do we find and create that particular seat at the table so that we can be the ones innovating and we can be the ones having or forging that sustainable future? Ms. Baker, any thoughts on that?
Actually, when I was reading Dr. Attzs' slides, what came to mind, I know that we want to go into opportunities, but specifically as it relates to crime now. In terms of someone that comes from a hotspot, specifically Mova Laventil, there is a stigma that's attached to the area. Now, luckily, there are those of us that have been able to transcend past that and move past that and still be given opportunities, that would be in line with our qualifications and our experience. However, coming from a hotspot, there's a natural reality where the policymakers are far removed from that. So if we're going to talk about crime, we have to talk about the socioeconomic factors that contribute to crime. Now, again, I was lucky enough to have parents that understood the importance of education, that more or less kept me inside studying because they saw a future for me, understanding the challenge coming from a hotspot. But that does not negate that there is a reality where persons are facing, as would have been shown in the slides, incest, sexual violence, lack of financial resources. All of these things lead to crime. And again, if there's a young person that is passionate and wants to move past that and has obtained qualifications, there's a stigma that comes with coming from a hotspot area. And I remember growing up, I was always told, don't put your address or use somebody else's address if you want to get a job. And you see, that is the ideology of society as it pertains to those of us that are most vulnerable, as it pertains to crime. Then how do we move past that? How do we speak to opportunity without speaking to their reality, without highlighting that this is in fact the challenges that they have to face? And so it really calls for grassroots organizations and for the ministries to give them the resources to infiltrate these communities so that young men and young women don't feel boxed in to that lifestyle, that you want to study, but you don't have any money. How do you get money right away because you need it to go to school or you need it to foot some expense that you have? That is the reality, and we have to highlight that in order to discuss solutions and opportunities.
I just want to make a quick comment. I hear everything and I agree with everything that you said, but I think some of the interventions are also psychological interventions, because the whole notion of saying that someone comes from a hotspot comes with a connotation, which I think we need to disregard those things and essentially unpack those things and leave them by the side. Because when someone understands or thinks that they're born in a hotspot area, not everyone is able to overcome that psychological challenge. So there is precisely, so we need to inculcate positive values. So even before, to my mind, even before, and I also think that Trinidad and Tobago is now one giant hotspot. But so moving swiftly ahead. But so I think we really need to start also work on the psychological impact of these things and how do we inculcate positive values. I come from over Laventille, but really and truly, I go to school every day and I speak and I articulate myself well, etc. That's a good thing. I come from the place where Steel Pan was born. I beat with desperados, as the case might be. So I think while it is important to have the funding to do some of the things, and I totally agree with what you said, I think there is also another kind of intervention that is required, including our moving away from terms like hotspots. Because the entire country, crime infiltrates every part of Trinidad and Tobago now.
No, I hear you on that particular point, but I think that's still what we use. That's still what our politicians use. So whatever's at the top eventually comes down to those at the bottom.
So maybe we need to start the training here.
Start here. That's why we have organizations such as the Heroes Foundation doing work in communities and with persons below the age of, well, let's say 15 to 20. So based on the comments that you just said from your fellow panelists, what are your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Kemuel. I mean, Dr. Attzs, I love the data because we need evidence-based decision-making in this country. And I'm actually very pleased that your data lined up to the work that we have done at Heroes, because there are 2 points I want to get into, if you all will indulge me a bit. Point one is youth development is real work, and it requires real resources to get done. That is not only money, but competencies. And it is not a government alone problem to fix. It is a whole of society problem to fix because every single part of the society contributes to the issues that we are seeing today and contributes to what is in place for young people. That's point one. Point two is youth empowerment and inclusion must be meaningful and must be sustained. And I'll explain this a little bit in what we do and what we've done at Heroes. We have brought the young people into the discussion, which has shown us that the basis of all of our intervention needs to be psychosocial development and sustainability education focused on equality and the elimination of violence, energy and environmental sustainability, and personal and career development, which lines up, Dr. Attzs, so well to the information you presented. And we will be putting out our spotlight report publicly soon that speaks to that point about the sexual abuse and the violence in the homes and the communities, and the need to really create safe spaces with safeguarding and reporting mechanisms and getting adults to encourage reporting around violence and abuse. That's a whole other beast that we should definitely have another discussion on going forward. When we look at the money required to run these programs, interventions must be long-term to have a sustainable impact. You do not water a plant for one day and expect it to grow well for the rest of its life. You have to be there with children. Our program is 3 years long, minimum, and we do not go back on that. The multilateral development agencies, UNICEF and the Pan American Development Foundation, they understand that and they support that for us. Local companies, it's an uphill battle to get them to see the importance and the need of long-term impact, long-term sustained interventions that support beyond just what you see at the surface. Because the school violence issue, we had 31 secondary schools and 9 migrant groups last year. 14 of those groups chose to do programs on mental health as a way of reducing violence and abuse because the children saw that connectivity. The one about youth inclusion now. Heroes, the board of Heroes Foundation made a very bold step in 2020 by bringing me on as CEO. I was 30 years old. And they believe that, if we want to have a youth-focused organization, we need young people really involved. So they brought on a 30-year-old CEO. When I came to them with the idea of, hey, I have this youth advisory team, I meet with them, they have been instrumental in everything, let's get them more included in the organization. My chairman said, good, let the chair of that advisory team now become part of the board. So you have the youth input. He was 17 years old at the board level, dealing with strategy, dealing with the organization is doing. We then integrated those young people into other parts of the organization, which allowed us to come to this point where when we speak about what young people are saying, it's not what we think. It's driven by the data collected from 400 or 500 people annually to present so that your solutions are evidence-based, right-based, and child-friendly. The child abuse investigation team that was put together by the Office of the Prime Minister, Gender and Child Affairs, at least 4 persons on that, I think there was probably 11 of us, at least 4 people on that team were under the age of 34 when that team was put together. And the Judith Jones report speaks very well and very clearly to the issues about safeguarding and protection in this country. And I want to really commend Minister Ayanna Webster Roy and that whole team at Gender and Child Affairs, because I've seen the work that they have been putting in under care and protection, the National Child Policy, the draft safeguarding and protection framework that they put in place. We've never had something like that in this country. I was surprised moving from energy into development, not seeing national guidelines for safeguarding and protection. Because in energy, HSSE is the Bible. You do not go against HSSE. And when something like development there, so you see the impact of including young people because it has real changes in what comes out because they're different lived experiences.
Sure. Mr. Arjoon, I don't mean to cut you, but I want to get Ms. Duncan in on the conversation. Ms. Duncan, you've heard the thoughts of your fellow panelists on the issues of sustainability and safety and creating safe spaces for the youth of today. What are your thoughts on that?
Hi, sorry, I was not hearing clearly. Can you please repeat the question?
Sure, that's no problem. So I was asking you if you can share your thoughts on the topic of sustainability and safe spaces for youth.
Okay. I think if we're talking about sustainable development, I will go back to look at quality education. Quality education is actually one of the UN's theme as the sustainable development goal. I think a solution providing quality education is policy changes to our education system. We must ensure that our student councils are active and are bringing real issues that our students face to the government forefront so that we can fix it and help our students to be the best that they can be. I think that we must ensure that there is digital transformation in our education system. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted a lot of flaws within our education system. A lot of people were not privy to having a tablet or having a computer system to go on online and to really be with their peers. And so we have to look at that, and we have to look at the digital transformation and creating a hybrid educational system, because not everyone learns the same. Not everyone can look at a blackboard and be in a classroom of 50 and still understand what the teacher is saying. And what do we do with that student who can't learn that way? We must provide those policy changes that ensures that no child is left behind within our education system. Another solution that I have is providing a supportive environment. As I spoke about prior, we must look at the cognitive, mental, and physical aspects of our students. To do that, we must ensure that we have effective guidance counselors. A young person cannot go to a school hungry and still learn. We have to have things in place to ensure that our students are okay at home, to providing good social workers in the school, providing food support. And this is not just on a government level. There must be a community-based aspect to this as well. Our youth groups must come into place and look at families and young people who need support to go, who need that food support, who need more things than just a book bag. Because yes, you're carrying the child to school, but the child has so many issues that they can't sit in a class and learn like everybody else. And if we're looking at sustainable development, we have to ensure that no child is left behind. If we're looking at sustainable development, we must improve our quality education. We must do research as to why our young men dropping out of school. And that research must also show the solutions of how do we keep young men in school? Do they need more physical education? Do they need a more physical aspect to learning? So we must do our research to find those solutions. at the Tobago Youth Council, we're actually looking to introduce more informal types of learning, not only to our students, but to the young people who are between 18 to 35, looking at financial management. Because something you don't learn in school is how to do your taxes or how to invest. Sometimes you learn those things after 35, and it's good to learn them when you're 18 or 16. So looking at the inclusivity and the digital transformation and the research-driven process behind our education, I think is important, providing sustainable development. We're looking at outputting proper young people who are ready to face the world. So we must do our part in the education system to really provide those resources for them, not just the academic, but the mental support, physical support. Thank you.
I think that's a common thread that's been passing around the panel. Everyone is saying, mental support, because you're going to provide a school bag for a child, you're going to provide stationery, all the other things. But if they don't have that mental support, that drive, that push to go forward, then you're not going to see that. Mr. Providence at Netco, you all are into entrepreneurship, and I know part of entrepreneurship is ensuring that whatever business you all fund is able to sustain itself going forward. How does what can you tell us about the work of Netco in that particular aspect of sustaining persons?
Sure. Excuse me. So, the idea of sustainability, and in particular, because we're talking about youth, I'll pay particular attention to that, and in terms of Netco services. So we aren't only concerned with helping persons start their business in terms of, persons think you come and you just get a loan, and you get the loan, and that's the end of it. What we do is, and we've been redefining and sort of perfecting how we disseminate the service. So we're now looking at a comprehensive, a full gambit of our suite of services, which includes business advisory. It also includes training. It also includes mentorship, in addition to the loan funding. So when you come to us, there's a complete assessment in terms of what is the business prospect and how we can assist. We look for training gaps and try to fill it by providing the training. And then we're going to provide the mentorship if that's needed, and the business advisory to help support the entrepreneur. Because I think Lawrence was, if I remember correctly, was talking about, if you want to talk about sustainability, it's not just for 1 or 2 years. You need to continue. You need to provide that safety net to take those businesses and to take the entrepreneurs through the challenges. Because as we know, entrepreneurship is in particular in what we call first world countries, it's the driving force of a lot of the economy. In Trinidad and Tobago, entrepreneurship is still sort of looked at as sort of a dirty word. It's something that you do when you can't get a job. Society still looks at it like that. And so we're trying to change the mindset, and in particular, our young people, that, there are viable options. There are different ways to create wealth and sustainability for yourself. And it's not just, okay, I need to have 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees and apply for a job. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there are other opportunities and there are other avenues that one can pursue if you're looking at how do I create value for myself and my family and the economy as a whole. So it's a holistic approach that we're taking.
And I agree with you based on knowing the work that Netco would have done from a previous incarnation. Yes. I want to look at opportunities that we have here in Trinidad and Tobago that the youth have that we can create for the youth. I know both Samantha, Terriann, and also Ms. Duncan. Ms. Duncan is from the Tobago Youth Council, and 2 ladies to my left, they are from Trinidad Youth Council, and they collaborate very, very closely from time to time. But on the aspect of creating that table for yourself, because you're not getting an opportunity at the table, or you're not being called to the table, and even when you are, it's for tokenism, as Ms. Rampersad would have mentioned. How do you think we can now move forward in creating that opportunity, creating those opportunities for ourselves? Who wants us?
You can go ahead.
Well, actually, what I want to speak about very quickly is that the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, they had put out an act to establish the National Youth Development Agency. And so they had invited comments from young persons. And of course, the TYC would have submitted comments. And within that act, I was very pleased to see that it is being proposed, in that bill, let me use the right terms, it's not an act yet, in that bill, right? So what is being proposed is that the membership of the board for that upcoming agency, should it become a bill, is that representatives of the council must be present, or that is proposed. And again, this is now where we are seeing, government, quote unquote, I don't want to use the word buy-in, but
approach.
Right.
Yeah.
But definitely including not just us, but understanding that young people should be at the helm of decision making, and even taking on what Dr. Attzs would have spoken about in terms of seeing how young people can not just become more and more involved in just discussions like these, but to actively have them a part of the sustainable model. So if this is going to be our future, then we should have a say in how the finances are executed now. And again, a wonderful idea with the youth budget discussion or proposal. And even very quickly, even internationally, the UN would have put out a report where, I can't remember which part of the world it was exactly, but they had a program where young persons were trained on policy development, policy analysis, how to interface with governments, the role of parliamentary committees, the role of parliament, how they can be integrated. And that is something that we need to incorporate young people in actively.
Well, I think on that particular point, the parliament certainly does a great work in doing what we have nationally parliament. I would have been a former national parliament myself, so I know on that particular point, the parliament does work in that particular aspect. Ms. Rampersad, your thoughts on the question that was asked before?
Yeah, I also want to add to that resources, as we all said just now, doesn't only mean financial. So it also means the support of not just the government, but companies as well. And so if we have, for instance, if we speak about the quality of education as well, and what I do with UNFP as a youth advisor, we are trying to focus on comprehensive sexuality education, because teenage pregnancy is also a factor, HIV and AIDS. It's a lot of things that impact us as youth. But we require support in order to go to schools. And when we say comprehensive sexuality, we're not just talking about sex. It's about you learning your anatomy as a female, as a male. There are a lot of males that don't know what the menstrual cycle is. And so we need to interface with each other, but we don't have the support of the government, because we also do not have the support of faith-based organizations. So we get pushback. And then when we take one step forward, we're 10 steps back. So how do we now go around? So what TYC has decided to do is to partner with UNFP to try to provide resources and capacity building sessions to young people, because we want to learn. We want to know how to take charge of our lives. And this is a major part of it, especially as young women, right? So capacity building sessions is also something needed. We need the resources. Financial is a big help. It's always necessary, but it's not the only revenue. And that goes in for sustainability as well. I just want to touch a little bit on employment and entrepreneurship. It's not necessarily just bringing out a clothing store online. As you would have mentioned, renewable resources, right? Why don't we, let's just say companies come together and they decide to put out a budget and say, okay, whichever young person can come up with a good, innovative, and sustainable idea to replace how much, what was the radio use? I'm sorry, the oils and stuff that we use, who can think about a new renewable method? And then you send your proposals forward, it's vetted, you come up with your groups, you'll be provided.
One thing I want to say with that, Samantha, yeah, because I'm mindful that our moderator is going to.
Yeah.
You can go ahead.
One thing is that we often look at innovation and entrepreneurship at the end of the cycle.
Yeah.
So because you have a degree now and you can't, you become an entrepreneur. These have to be inculcated. That creative spirit has to be allowed to breathe from the time you're in primary school, from the time you're in secondary school, which requires some tweaking and some accommodation in our education system. So it's not when you finish a degree and you can't get a job that you decide that you're going to go to NNET, but it has to be allowed. Our system must allow you to decide that, okay, you know, when the answer to the question that you're asked in class is not what the teacher wants, the teacher now stops and thinks, okay, well, this is really was an innovative response. Yeah. So I will give the person the marks, even though it is not what I was thinking of. And that is what, those are some of the kinds of changes I think that need to happen to allow our young persons to be innovative and to be entrepreneurial and to essentially unleash that spirit inside of them, you know, and it's not simply something in response to being unemployed. And my last point, because I know that we need to run, many companies now, the private sector, and we spoke about financing as a challenge, and I know the government is challenged itself, but a lot of companies, private sector companies, are aligning themselves to the ESG, the environmental, social, and governance. And I think for those private sector companies that might be listening, I think this is a masterful opportunity for them to essentially put their money where their mouths are and get young persons more involved in terms of driving that ESG in the respective companies. So I think there are many opportunities. It's just that we have to bring our minds together. I like the idea of being innovative and having your own table. But I think there are also opportunities out there.
But let me just say, while we're involving young people, because a lot of us volunteer, but there are not any incentives for us. Yeah, let's try to change that narrative while we're at it.
I'm glad that you said it. I'm glad that you said it. Ms. Arjoon, we do have a couple of minutes remaining. What are your thoughts on us creating our own opportunities?
I mean, what I will say is evidence-based, rights-based, strength-based. That needs to guide everything that we do. The strength-based one, we are individuals, we are unique, we are dynamic. One intervention is not going to work for everyone. There is a lot of opportunity for collaboration. That means I'm going to be talking to all of you all after this to see how we can get involved with Heroes. But there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration because everybody is operating in different spaces and seeing things differently. I think if we come back to evidence-based, rights-based, and strengths-based in everything that we do, to build long-term, sustainable, measurable interventions. I'm very happy that you raised ESG, because last year, at the end of last year, Heroes put out our indicators reference sheets, because all of our interventions are aligned to SDG indicators, not goals. Goals are dreams. Your indicators are your steps to get to where you need to go. And we can give you a sheet that shows how all of our intervention aligns to indicators. But that takes money and that takes resources to have a long-term sustained impact on the life of children who will build the future that we inherit or they inherit.
Ms. Duncan, what are your thoughts on us creating our own opportunities?
Okay, I'm sorry again. I am unable to hear my colleagues clearly, but I'm sure that they will be sharing lovely sentiments and opportunities. As it relates to the Tobago space, I must highlight the youth empowerment strategy that was recently launched by the Division of Youth Development, Sport and Community. So there was a consultation of all the young people in the islands and all the youth groups, and we touched on youth in agriculture, youth in policy changes, youth in education, and youth in all aspects of government and as it relates to policies. And I love that they did that because at every pillar of that strategy, they involved young people. And so I would just take this time to call on my young people to not just sit at the table, but bring a critical contribution. There are opportunities out there, and too many times I see young people not accepting those opportunities. They rather sit aside and let someone else do it. I always say, be the change that you want to see. When you hear about these consultations, go to them. Say what you want from the government or the teaching that aspect. Say what you need as a young person. Speak your mind. Use social media and other mediums, because there are always opportunities for us to speak. There are always opportunities for us to be the change that we want to see. And I again want to really applaud the Department of Youth for bringing out that Tobago Youth Empowerment Strategy. I am looking forward to its implementation. It really looks at the youth in all aspects of the government, in all aspects of Trinidad and Tobago. And so I'm looking forward to not just the opportunity, but to be an active part of those policy changes.
Sure. As we close, because obviously we're pressing time, we're approaching our closing time. I'd like to ask for your closing comments. I'll start with you, Ms. Rampersad.
Generally, I just hope that, coming up from this conversation, it doesn't just remain as a conversation, but the relevant persons can do some introspection, review the system, make it more accommodating, and just start valuing young people for what we really and truly are.
Ms. Baker.
And just springboarding off of what Samantha would have said, also recognizing the contribution of young persons actively in the process today. Because again, these conversations sound good in the ears of others, but people need to see the reality of this conversation impacting their lives. And so my hope, my dream, is my anticipation, I should say, after this discussion, is that not only that we would connect, but that we would begin to impact young people where they are, with their socioeconomic challenges. And again, with what Samantha had said, youth work is hard. We work hard in the background. And again, there's sometimes no recognition, no resources at times. We have to do it from our own pockets. And we hope that we can get that support to drive the vision that we have volunteered our time for.
Mr. Providence.
Right. So I just want to say in closing that, entrepreneurship and in particular for youth is a viable option. And there are resources through NETCO and through the Ministry of Youth and some of the other ministries as well who are championing the cause. And I think more information needs to be had and shared, because some of it, I think, sometimes gets lost. There are lots of programs and there are lots of initiatives, but I don't know if it's reaching all of the persons, and in particular the youth, in terms of what is available. At NETCO, we have the Business Accelerator Program, which in and by itself is geared towards youth and youth development. But again, we aren't always sure if it's getting to the persons in the right time. And so, this is an opportunity for us to share the information, and we're hoping that more and more young people get involved.
Mr. Arjoon.
I think what I got from this entire conversation is data, investment, and collaboration if we want to have a positive, sustained impact on our society.
Dr. Attzs.
All right, the last word. Sustainable development is really very dear to my heart, and I think it's something that we cannot afford to miss this boat. I think I want to challenge our youth to embrace the opportunities, certainly starting with our budgeting process. So that comes up in September. I want to challenge the government of Terriann and Tobago, and I also want to challenge our youth to challenge the government of Terriann and Tobago that come September, when the budget is presented, that you make your voices be heard, because this is your future. This is yours. It's not mine anymore. It is yours. You're the people who are going to be taking up the baton and going forward into the future, whether it's SDGs 2030 or 2050, as the case might be. So I want to give you the opportunity to challenge those of us who have been, in the forefront over the years, and to take the baton to run forward.
Ms. Duncan, very quickly, because we are running out of time, what are your closing remarks? Okay, I think there may be a technical difficulty, and she isn't hearing us.
Sorry, I didn't.
Are you hearing us, Ms. Duncan?
No, I'm not hearing you.
So we're asking for your closing remarks very quickly.
Closing remarks, is that correct?
Yes, closing remarks, correct.
Okay, I would just like to close and say that in order for sustainable development and in order for youth and innovation to be successful, we must have more collaborative efforts, not just between youth and the government, but between young people and themselves, young people and other youth organizations, in order to achieve the goals that we set for each other. We must be able to work hand in hand and ensure that no one is left behind, ensure that we use our community groups to lift up others, ensure that we use our community and youth groups to provide leadership avenues for other young people to get the skills that they need in order to be a sustainable young person.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Duncan. And I would also like to thank my panelists who would have appeared today, obviously on behalf of the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And as we close, I would just like to wrap up and really talk about quickly what we would have spoken about this morning. I think what we're calling for is a data approach, as Ms. Arjoon would have mentioned. We're calling for things to be formalized, and we're calling for funding. We're not just speaking about things now. We want things to be funded for the future. This has been a discussion here on the Parliament channel on youth, innovation, and sustainability challenges and opportunities in the national sphere. I am Kemuel A. Pascall. Thank you so very much for joining us today.
Yes. that hour was